Burkina Faso is not a country that you often see in the headlines of major Western news networks. For many years, it was described simply as one of the poorest nations on earth, a place struggling with drought, instability, and violence. But today, under the leadership of one young soldier, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the nation has suddenly become the center of global attention. What makes this story truly fascinating is not only the rise of such a young leader, but the fact that his actions are shaking the powerful structures that have controlled Africa for decades. And this raises the question, why is the United States so silent about him? Why are American media avoiding this story? What truth is being hidden from the American people? To understand the significance of Ibrahim Traoré, we need to first look at the recent history of Burkina Faso. The country had been plagued by terrorist attacks for years, with entire villages being wiped out by extremist groups. Many people asked, how are these groups so well armed in such a poor region? Where do they get their resources? Some reports suggested that these conflicts were not just random acts of terror, but were connected to deeper struggles over resources, control, and influence. Ordinary people were losing faith in their leaders, and the nation was falling apart. It was in this environment of chaos that Traoré, a captain in the army, led a bold coup in September 2022. At just 34 years old, he became the youngest head of state in the world. For many Burkina citizens, this was not just a military takeover. It was a chance for survival, a hope that someone young and uncorrupted could lead them out of despair. Crowds filled the streets, waving flags, shouting his name, and carrying pictures of him as if he were already a legendary figure. The energy was electric. Burkina Faso had a leader who spoke their language and understood their pain. But the real shock came not from his age or his rise to power, but from the decisions he began making almost immediately. Traoré openly criticized France, the former colonial ruler of Burkina Faso, accusing it of exploitation and double standards. He questioned the presence of French troops in his country, asking why, after years of so-called counter-terrorism missions, the terrorists were still strong. To the West, this was a dangerous statement because it suggested something few leaders ever dared to say publicly, that foreign troops might not be in Africa to help, but rather to maintain influence and extract resources. By early 2023, made the bold decision to cut ties with France's military presence and seek new partnerships. Suddenly, Burkina Faso was no longer a silent follower of Western policies. It was a nation charting its own course. And this is where the United States began to quietly take notice. Washington had invested heavily in Africa, building bases, launching military operations, and pouring billions into aid programs that often came with hidden strings attached. A young leader rejecting the West threatened to inspire others, and this could create a ripple effect across the continent. Already, his influence was spreading. In Mali and Niger, two neighboring countries, similar movements were gaining momentum. Together, these nations began forming new alliances, shutting out France and looking for alternatives. And if you listen carefully to Traoré's speeches, you hear not only the voice of a national leader, but the voice of a continental movement. He speaks of African unity, of independence, of rejecting neocolonialism. He calls out the hypocrisy of Western governments that preach democracy but only support it when it serves their interests. These are words that resonate deeply across Africa but sound like alarm bells in Washington and Paris. So, what does the United States fear about Captain Traoré? It is not simply his defiance, it is the example he sets. For decades, American strategy in Africa has relied on predictability. Leaders who cooperate are rewarded with aid and protection. Leaders who resist are often isolated, destabilized, or removed. But Traoré is young, fearless, and unpredictable. He is not weighed down by decades of political compromise. He does not speak like a polished diplomat. He speaks like a soldier who has seen his people suffer and is willing to fight for them. That makes him dangerous to the established order. Even more concerning for Washington is the direction Burkina Faso is turning. Russia has begun offering military support, while China shows interest in trade and infrastructure. This shift toward new partners threatens to push the West out of a region it has long considered its sphere of influence. The United States may not say it openly, but losing control in Africa means losing access to critical resources like uranium, gold, and rare earth minerals, resources that are essential for modern economies and military technologies. And here is the chilling thought: what if more African countries follow Traoré's path? What if an entire continent decides it no longer wants to play by Washington's rules? This is where the story takes on a more suspenseful turn, because if you look at history, leaders who challenge the West in Africa rarely have happy endings. Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary president of Burkina Faso in the 1980s, was assassinated under mysterious circumstances after trying to lead his country to independence. Patrice Lumumba of Congo suffered a similar fate. Both had dared to speak about African self-reliance, and both were eliminated. Today, many Africans fear that Traoré might face the same dangers. And yet, despite these risks, he continues to speak boldly, unafraid of the consequences. Meanwhile, in the United States, silence dominates. Major media outlets rarely mention his name. Government officials speak only in vague terms about instability or concerns about democracy. But ask yourself, why? Is the American public not being told about a leader who is reshaping Africa? Why is a story of such global importance being hidden? Could it be that the truth that Africa is breaking free would force Americans to question their government's role on the continent? Could it be that the U.S. is afraid of its own people, asking why billions are spent on foreign bases while poverty and problems at home continue to grow? The suspense grows every day. Traoré is rising in popularity, his message spreading across borders. He is not just leading Burkina Faso, he is inspiring a generation. But with inspiration comes danger, and history tells us that the more a leader challenges the powerful, the more the powerful push back. And this is why the story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just about one man, it is about the future of Africa and the hidden fears of the United States. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's rise has already shaken the foundations of West Africa, but his story is far from local. It is deeply global. To understand why, we need to step back and ask, what is at stake for the world powers if Burkina Faso truly breaks free from Western influence? Let's start with resources. Burkina Faso may not be a giant economy, but it holds gold, manganese, and other critical minerals. Nearby Niger holds uranium, essential for nuclear power plants in Europe. Mali holds vast, untapped reserves. Together, these countries form a belt of resources that the world depends on. For decades, Western companies and governments have maintained dominance here, ensuring steady supplies at cheap costs. The people of these nations, however, have remained poor. That imbalance is not an accident, it is the foundation of neocolonialism. Now, imagine what happens when leaders like Traoré demand that these resources benefit their own citizens first. Imagine them saying, no more cheap deals for France, no more exclusive contracts for the West. From now on, Africa decides. This idea is powerful. It is not just about money, it is about dignity. And dignity, once claimed, cannot be taken away. This is exactly what Washington fears, and why American media chooses silence. If the public in the United States understood that Africans are standing up against exploitation, they might start questioning why their government has been involved in Africa for decades without real progress for its people. But Traoré's challenge goes deeper than economics. It strikes at the heart of global military strategy. The United States has dozens of bases across Africa, most of them little known to the public. These bases are presented as part of the war on terror. But in reality, they also serve another purpose: projection of power. From Africa, the U.S. can monitor not only terrorists, but also rivals like China and Russia. Losing influence in West Africa would mean losing a strategic chessboard in the global power game. And yet, the young leader of Burkina Faso is telling America and France, your time here is ending. This is why many analysts quietly predict that Traoré will not be allowed to continue unchecked. The West has a long history of dealing with troublesome leaders. Some are overthrown through coups, quietly supported from abroad. Some are isolated through sanctions until their people turn against them. Others, as history tragically shows, are assassinated. The suspense surrounding Traoré grows heavier when you realize how many times in the past Africa has seen this exact story play out. Yet there is something different about Traoré. He is not isolated, he is part of a growing alliance. Mali and Niger have openly joined Burkina Faso in rejecting French troops. Together, these three nations formed the Alliance of Sahel States, a defense pact that unites their militaries against both terrorism and external interference for the first time in decades. African nations are forming alliances not designed in Paris, London, or Washington, but designed by themselves. This unity is a new threat to Western dominance, because it cannot be easily divided. Meanwhile, Russia has stepped in, offering military training and equipment. China is offering infrastructure and investment. These partnerships may not be perfect, but they represent choice, something Africans have long been denied. And this is where the United States finds itself in a dangerous position. If it attacks or undermines Traoré too openly, it risks pushing Burkina Faso fully into the arms of its rivals. If it stays silent, it risks losing influence without a fight. This delicate balance explains why Washington chooses silence. Silence is not ignorance, it is strategy, but silence also creates suspicion. Ordinary Americans are rarely told what their government is doing in Africa. When soldiers are stationed there, the media barely mentions it. When billions are spent on aid or military cooperation, the details remain hidden. Why? Because the government knows that if Americans asked, why are we in Burkina Faso? Why are we spending billions while our own schools and hospitals crumble? The answers would be uncomfortable. Traoré's story, if widely known, would force these questions to the surface. At the same time, inside Burkina Faso, Traoré is becoming a symbol. People compare him to Thomas Sankara, the legendary leader assassinated in 1987. Like Sankara, Traoré wears simple military uniforms, avoids luxury, and speaks directly to the people. Like Sankara, he calls for self-reliance and rejects foreign interference. But unlike Sankara, Traoré is rising in a world where Africa is less alone. There are new powers willing to partner with him, and new technologies spreading his message beyond borders. Videos of his speeches circulate widely on social media, inspiring not just Burkina Faso citizens but Africans across the continent. This is the part of the story that truly unsighs Washington. The idea that Traoré is not just a national leader, but a continental spark. In Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and South Africa, young people talk about him. They see in him a reflection of their own frustrations. He represents a possibility that their leaders have denied them, the possibility of standing tall against global giants. This is not just politics, it is psychology. And psychology spreads faster than armies. So what happens next? This is the suspense that keeps the story alive. Will Traoré survive long enough to realize his vision? Will the West try to neutralize him as they did with past African leaders? Or will the tide of history be too strong this time, sweeping away the old order? The silence of the U.S. suggests one thing clearly. They know this story matters. They know it has the power to reshape Africa, and perhaps the world. But by hiding it from their people, they hope to buy time. Yet time may not be on their side. Every day Traoré remains in power. His influence grows. Every speech he makes, every alliance he builds, every policy he enacts strengthens his image as the face of Africa's new independence. And with every passing day, the United States faces the risk of losing not just a country, but an entire region. The suspense is not whether Traoré is important, it is how far his influence will spread, and what the world's hidden powers will do about it. This battle is not fought with tanks in the streets or jets in the skies. It is fought with narratives, economics, and influence. On one side, you have the people of Burkina Faso, desperate for a new future, rallying behind a young captain who gives them hope. On the other, you have the world's most powerful nations, who have spent decades building systems of control. What happens when these two forces collide? Already, signs of the struggle are visible. Western NGOs and think tanks quietly release reports questioning Traoré's commitment to democracy. Media outlets, when they do cover him, focus on human rights concerns or authoritarian tendencies. Yet they rarely mention the daily struggles Burkina Faso citizens faced before his rise: the poverty, the fear of terrorism, the sense of abandonment. The narrative is clear. Prepare the world to see Traoré not as a hero, but as a potential dictator. This narrative war is as important as any battle on the ground, because if the world accepts it, interventions can be justified. At the same time, economic pressure is a powerful weapon. Sanctions have been used before to strangle governments that defy Western interests. Aid can be suspended, trade deals canceled, loans denied. For a poor country like Burkina Faso, these measures can be devastating. But here lies the twist. Burkina Faso is no longer alone. With Russia, China, and even Turkey showing interest, the old weapons of isolation may not work as effectively. This terrifies Washington, because it means their usual playbook may be outdated. Yet even with allies, Traoré's path is dangerous. Assassinations are not relics of the past. They remain tools of modern geopolitics. Across Africa and beyond, leaders who resisted too strongly have been mysteriously removed. Many in Burkina Faso whisper about this possibility. Traoré himself knows it, and yet, he walks forward fearlessly, often appearing in public without the excessive security seen with other leaders. This courage endears him to his people, but increases the suspense of his story. Will he be allowed to live long enough to fulfill his mission? For the United States, the calculation is complicated. They cannot easily attack him without exposing their own hypocrisy. They cannot ignore him without losing ground. And so, for now, they remain silent, hoping events will unfold in their favor. But silence is not absence. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies, diplomats, and strategists are certainly watching closely. They are measuring his every move, calculating responses, and waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, in the streets of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, ordinary people chant his name. Mothers bring their children to see him, saying, "This is our hope." Young men paint murals of him on walls, calling him Africa's defender. To them, Traoré is not just a leader, he is proof that the continent can rise. This emotional bond between leader and people is something no amount of propaganda can erase. And this is why the West fears him most. Because when people believe deeply in a cause, they are willing to sacrifice everything for it. So we end this story not with a conclusion, but with a question. How far will this battle go? Will Traoré succeed in building a new future for Burkina Faso, inspiring a continent to break free from centuries of control? Or will history repeat itself, with another African leader silenced before his dream is realized? The suspense is real. The stakes are high, and the silence of the U.S. only makes the truth more urgent. What is America hiding from its people? Why are they not told of a young African captain changing the destiny of his country? Perhaps because the truth is too powerful. Perhaps because the truth would reveal that even the strongest empires cannot control the will of a people forever. And so, the story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about Africa's awakening. It is about the hidden fears of the United States. And above all, it is about the unstoppable power of truth, rising from the heart of a continent long underestimated, now demanding its place in history.